things to think about.
Yeah. Very
Or two in the last 12 hours.
Oh, really? I think mostly just say people say nice things about you.
Should we not have left it to them over on the right side together?
All right, now let's just think about Zoom one another.
Good afternoon.
Yes, speak loudly. Thanks everybody for being here. Well fun today. Yeah, it's yeah.
Put us on alert.
So
Never.
it's a good thing to tell Kevin just to put that filter on, right?
My wife tells me that I have a indefatigable war with the silence. For 27 years, she's been like, Kevin, you can't even go 2 minutes.
Okay.
It is a constant war with the silence. It's sadly probably accurate.
Yeah, it's like they say like, well, I don't teach that often, but people, you know, if you're kind of creating space for students to respond, sometimes you should wait 10 seconds and like you actually wait 10 seconds. I think that would make you very comfortable, right? Yeah, should we do it like one?
No,
This is long.
It's a very long
It's
time.
long.
Yeah, but I think in terms of like folks like comfortable putting themselves out there in
So-
that environment, like it might create a space.
I think it's a really important tool to have in your arsenal. Unfortunately.
We all got to play to our strengths. Right?
I'll say from our leadership development programs, the trick though, you wait so that you get more input, but then sometimes it's from the same who are impatient with the silence, and the ones you're trying to give the longer
The ones with more
introverted,
tolerance for silence.
reflective, piece to really process and deliberate before they share. You still have to find additional mechanisms
ways.
besides the counting to 10. Yeah.
Very true. Yes.
It is definitely handy every once in a while to have someone under the table kick me, like in a lobby meeting, like this is the time that you elected to speak. Thank you. Important reminder.
That's how you really can like throw stuff at their face.
Welcome to college.
So as you probably know, we have folks joining us over Zoom today and for the audience. So the folks who RSVP to be here in the audience also have the option to stay in their office and watch it over Zoom. What we're doing today. But I'm Erin. I do marketing and communications here at the College of Corporate Affairs, and I work with Cy Adler. And he's the dean of the college, and this was these panels are really special to Cy. And I just wanted to read a little bit of to give everyone a little bit of context of why they're so important to him. And this is straight from the paper that you'll probably hear referenced in the panels today. Earlier this year, PhD candidate Kimberly Nightingale and Professor Emeritus Stephen Seltzer wrote a paper entitled Portland State and the Urban University Idea that examines the history of the urban university idea in the US and presents a working definition of what an urban university is today. It then examines the way that being an urban university has been baked into Portland State's identity from the very beginning and concludes with some thoughts about where we might go from here. So what Cy always said when he first showed the paper to me and to our colleagues is he wants these panels to pick up where the paper left off. So the co-authors of that paper, I think, meant for this to start a conversation. And so these are those conversations. So this is the third panel in this series. We have several more. So please feel free to avail yourselves of, we have little handbills over here and flyers. You can grab those on the way out if you want. We also have water and snacks over here. If anyone needs anything during the event, so feel free to get out. This is a very casual environment. And then we also have restrooms right outside if anybody needs that. I think I'm probably just going to turn this over to, actually, no, I have one more thing to tell you. You're using a podcasting microphone. And so when folks from the audience ask questions, it's a little harder for those questions. So I'm asking you folks to potentially repeat the question, if possible, paraphrase maybe, just so our folks at home. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin.
Great.
Go ahead and
All right.
okay, introduce yourself.
Thank
and-
you. Thanks so much and welcome. Really appreciate the introduction and I do know that in the course of our discussions with Dean Adler over the last few months, he's been really energized about this as a springboard for talking about really the intersection between Portland State and our city and how we've together developed over the last 50 years. So I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Kevin Neely. I'm the Vice President for University Relations and the Interim Chief of Staff for President Percy. We were laughing earlier about how you really are not a Portland State person if you don't have a really long title. So I keep adding to mine and again, really privileged to be able to be here. I want to take a minute to introduce our panelists. They're really the most important folks today as we engage in this discussion. So I'm going to start in the middle with Commissioner Susheela Jayapal. Commissioner Jayapal represents the citizens of Multnomah County that live in District 2, which I think stretches from north to northeast Portland. As I looked at it, it looked like it was St. John's all the way over to maybe a little beyond Maywood Park. Really a wonderful part of our community. And she was elected in 2018 to a 4-year term. While I am confident that her work covers a huge breadth as she engages in her efforts at the county, her top priorities include houselessness, community safety, economic justice, and climate change. So really a wonderful portfolio. She earned her undergraduate degree in economics at Swarthmore College at the age of 20. That's incredible. And after a short stint in finance, earned her JD from the University of Chicago Law School. Professionally, she was a litigation attorney at firms in San Francisco and Portland, and most recently served as general counsel for Adidas America, where she was responsible for the legal affairs and human resources functions of the company, and was instrumental in creating the brand's first set of labor standards to be applied to factories overseas. Prior to joining the commission, she was also significantly engaged in activities and organizations throughout our region. We thank you for that service and your continuing service. Those included the Portland Schools Foundations, All Hands Raised, Planned Parenthood of the Columbia-Willamette, Metropolitan Family Services, and many, many more. I really appreciate you taking a couple minutes of your couple hours of your busy schedule out of your busy schedule to be with us here today. And in a minute, I'll let folks add on if they want to add on anything to my more canned remarks. The next person I'm going to introduce, as I said, I'm working my way out of the middle. Sarah Salzberg is the director of the Center for Public Service and the Marco Hatfield School of Government. As director, she provides leadership and management of the center, builds collaborations and partnerships to support the center's work, and continues to participate in program design and delivery as a trainer, facilitator, and coach. Sarah started at PSU in 2007, administering human resources, budget, and contracting for the Executive Leadership Institute, and served as the center's assistant director from July of 2011 to July of 2019. She's no stranger to institutional collaboration, the topic that we're confronting today. Prior to coming into Portland State, Sarah worked for the City of Portland in the Diversity Development and Affirmative Action Office in the Bureau of Human Resources for 5 years. Sarah holds an MBA in Education, Policy, Foundations, and Administration from Portland State, and completed her BA in International Affairs and Hispanic Studies at Lewis and Clark College. Her areas of specialization include talent development, strengths-based leadership development for individuals and teams, instructional design for adult learners, diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, and organizational development. Sarah, so pleased to have you here today. Thank you so much. At the end, we have Michael Jordan. Michael serves as the Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Portland, a role he assumed, I think, earlier this year. Is that right? After serving 7 years as the Director of the Bureau of Environmental Services. Mike's public service spans over 3 decades, including similar administrative and operational leadership roles for Metro Regional Government and the state of Oregon. Prior to that work, he spent several years as a Clackamas County Commissioner. Mike's work extends beyond his public service. He served on boards and commissions throughout this region, including Willamette Partnership, League of Oregon Cities, SOLVE, United Way of Columbia-Willamette, and our own Institute of Metropolitan Studies, just to name a few. So really incredible body of work. After a stint at University of Oregon, where I understand you were a varsity baseball player.
I majored in baseball.
Majored in baseball. Well, the good news is you found your way north and completed your degree right here at Portland State University. I would say Michael really embodies PSU's motto, let knowledge serve the city. We'll talk a little bit about that today. He's dedicated his professional life to serving our communities across the state. So again, thanks for taking some time to be here today. We really appreciate your service. Last, certainly not least, is Fletcher Beaudoin. And he and I argue about how to pronounce his last name. Did I get close?
Yeah, no, it's actually Beaudoin because that's how my wife says it.
Okay. I'll get it straight one of these days. Fletcher wears many hats for Portland State University. Principal among them, he is the director of our Distinguished Institute for Sustainable Studies. He also serves as a key cog in the president's newly created Community Impact and Engagement Initiative. I'm pleased that he works with me in that effort. He's been part of the PSU community for over 13 years. And throughout that time, he has been absolutely instrumental in supporting sustainability and cross-institutional collaboration, both here and outside the walls of the university. He earned his undergraduate degree from University of Oregon in English, film, and Spanish. I actually just learned that today, Fletcher. So it's clear to me why you went on to earn your master's in public administration from Columbia, where you focused on energy and environmental policy. And I will say, just anecdotally, when I first met Fletcher, he asked me if I was any relation to a guy named Quinn Neely, who apparently he played soccer with in the early days and is my brother. My much younger brother, I must add. And so it was kind of a fun, just realized quickly, and I think it's part of what will be the underpinnings of our conversation today, just how small a community ours is here in Oregon, and frankly, the community across the state is. Those are the introductions that I gleaned from the internet.
Very complete.
Which it turns out can be dangerous. Is there anything anyone wants to add otherwise I'm more than happy to dive in. What did I miss?
I'll just say you must have been really persistent because I show up on the internet in element like 587. There are a lot of Michael Jordan elements before mine.
I will say, it did require me to learn your middle initial.
Yeah. Which happens to be the same.
But nevertheless, I think you're underestimating your impact, certainly in the community. I will tell you, if you put in Michael Jordan Portland, you're first on the list. So that was important. Well, I'm going to kick off today's event really by giving a shout out to the College of Urban and Public Affairs for putting these things together. I am really pleased to be part of the Portland State ecosystem, and really, as someone that works in government affairs and public relations, just pleased to have a resource like the College of Urban and Public Affairs here in my backyard, and I'm certain, and I think it has been a really valuable resource in the backyard of our community. So those of you who are out there watching, who are part of the College of Urban and Public Affairs, thank you for all the work you do in really creating these institutional relationships that live beyond our Portland State University community. The theme for today is indeed institutional collaboration. And the paper that was alluded to earlier, which is Portland State, Portland State and the Urban University idea, really highlights the critical role that PSU has played in the development of Portland since 1972. We were a university in its infancy. Just last year, we celebrated our 75th anniversary as an institution. So the notion that a university or that a community plan would center itself in some way around a university that was at that time really only 25 years old, I think is a tribute to the visionary city that we all live in. I'm probably going to spend a little bit less time talking about the last 50 years. I think we all know that that's been a really instrumental time of growth in our community with both good and bad outcomes. And if we have some time at the end of the day, we'll talk about that. I'm actually going to focus a lot of my conversation and our conversation today on the next 50 years and how Portland State can be both a partner with our community and a resource for our community. And my hope with this panel, and we have a good mix of people from Portland State and people from our community, leadership really from our community. I hope to learn a little bit more, and I'll be taking notes, and this is all going to be recorded on what we might be able to do as an institution to really be an engaged partner moving forward. With that, I'm going to get us started. I do want to just kind of highlight one of the things that is here that was in the paper. Really was a look towards the future. The conclusion of this paper, for those that read it, and I do encourage a good read, really is, how do we learn from the experiences from our engagement over the last 50 years to better engage moving forward. With that, I might start by citing a quick note from the paper, really, that was, we lived in an era of urbanization, and then Mayor Terry Shrunk, as he was coming into his power here in the city, he looked for PSU to kind of develop a city planning degree, be a center part of the planning for our city, and really emphasize the importance of planning as it relates to urbanization. That question of how urbanization continues to grow is one that we are still struggling with, I think, today, maybe perhaps more than ever in our history. And so my question for the panelists is, and this is the hardest softball that we're going to have, and I think as we talked about it before we got here today, it's not as big a softball as one might think. What are the biggest, most difficult challenges that we're facing today? So that's kind of the overarching question. Then, of course, the reason we're here today is what are the collaborations with Portland State and other regional partners that can have a big impact in addressing those challenges. So I might start with you, Commissioner, if you'd be willing to answer that. So again, biggest challenges we're facing today. You could pick 1 or 2 or 10, but
I
and
think
then-
I'll stop with 2.
and then what do you think our role is in all of this?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. I did read the paper and found it pretty fascinating. I hadn't really thought about as deeply about the role of urban serving universities and what that means. So thank you. Appreciate this opportunity. The biggest challenges, I'll pick 2, as I said, climate. I think that is absolutely, the existential issue of our day, literally. And we've seen it play out in so many different ways just over the last year. We're seeing it play out to some extent today with the smoke that we're experiencing. And it's certainly in terms of the county and everything that the county does, we are, among other things, a local public health authority. And so thinking about the impact of climate on public health has been just a critical part of what we do. So climate, and then I would say, in terms of day-to-day houselessness. And the crisis of lack of housing that we see play out on our streets every day. Housing is, in my opinion, an essential human right. And when people don't have housing, they can't access all of the other things that life has to offer, that a city environment has to offer. So those would be the challenges I would pick. And, I think there are some really terrific collaborations already happening on those fronts. I know more about collaborations around houselessness than I do around climate, although I'm sure Fletcher can talk more about that. But on houselessness, for example, there is the, I'm going to forget what the acronym stands for, but it's the HRAC, Housing Research Action Collaborative.
Really close,
that
and
what it
I
is?
often forget the acronym too. Houselessness Research and Action Collaborative.
Thank
You
you.
were almost there. Perfect.
There we go. I think that's really kind of a classic example of what collaboration between an urban serving university and local government looks like, right? So it is research, it's applied research, and it's research conducted in collaboration with the county, with the city. I know we've turned to HRAC to do some really important work on our shelters, on ideas around affordable housing. So that's one of the examples I'll see. And then on climate, I'll mention, this was something that occurred to me. I was on a trip to Denmark earlier in the summer. And there was a delegation from Portland that went to Denmark, including Commissioner Rubio, really under her leadership, to look at what Denmark is doing around industrial symbiosis. I can whip that term out now. I had no idea what it was when I went to Denmark. But it's the idea that industries can collaborate among each other and with government to reduce waste and to reduce emissions and to really advance a host of climate-friendly policies. And one of the interesting things we learned there was that the local university in one of the towns that we visited has created a PhD in industrial symbiosis and works very closely in collaboration with business and with local government to research technological solutions, to research and apply process solutions, management solutions. And I think the position was actually created with initial seed funding from a local government. That's not an offer from Multnomah County. But
I just wrote it down.
but you know, to me, that's an example of something I've seen out in the world.
That's wonderful, and those are issues that sit, I think, large in the minds of our students here at PSU, and particularly climate. I think they have such a strong feeling of the vulnerability that we've had a number of climate conversations on our campus, and so I want to get through the rest of the panel, and I'd like to come back to that topic in just a second. So I'm not sure who wants to go next. Sarah, why don't we go and
Jump in so that we're following our
We'll follow our
introductory remarks.
That's right.
And are you able to hear me clearly? Okay. Well, good afternoon. And I don't think there's any way around putting climate if we're picking, top two. I think building on that, I just add the intersection, with people. So the social justice side of it, I think of like in intersectional environmentalism, or how we do the protecting people and planet. There's so much right now. The university is working on its own equity and plan, and all of the work of how are we building systems that aren't based on privilege and oppression, and that side. And reading the paper that had a lot of interesting history in addition to what I already knew, but I also didn't see any mention sort of the historic tribal lands we're on. And I think that I know, where's my colleague from next door, because Ethan would give me the latest. I think it's from the 2010 census, but I think we're like the 9th largest urban Indian population in the country, right, of over 40,000. And so that sense of, engaging. So I just want to add in with climate justice, I think of, we have the Institute for Tribal Government within, and I think of like tribal water justice and these additional components of where, I don't know, all of our wicked problems really are at those points of intersection. And then to the actual work around it, I would underscore that piece of public impact research that applied. I think that's a strength that this university is built on, of faculty who are really passionate about community engaged learning, and then helping that is our graduates out in the community ready to apply, like lend their creativity towards some innovative action. So lots of projects. I think HRAC is a great example, and we have a lot of those community university partnerships. And I think the other role that PSU is invited to step into and expand is that neutral convener, right? We have connections all across the state, and I was mentioning just before we got started, also across the globe. So a lot of the work that we do engages local government leaders, but in Vietnam, local government leaders from Japan, and also looking, so when we're talking of something of the scale of climate, I love the sense of urban serving, but then there's also, but are we really defined by the metro region in that let knowledge serve versus like the scale of challenges that require, much broader partnerships. So I know we'll talk about the let knowledge serve more later, but I'm thinking about that sense of expanding those partnerships. So jump right in.
Okay, well, hard to follow. maybe take a slightly different tack. I think maybe the biggest challenge that this region this urban landscape faces, I think, and it's one we faced for a long time, we haven't figured it out yet. And it's really how to govern. 24 cities, 3 counties, 5 school districts, a number of special districts, a port, TriMet, Metro. And I was fond of saying back at Metro that we couldn't even make a bad decision. We struggle to make metropolitan-wide decisions. And so I think regardless of the content of the particular public policy issue, our ability to govern this metropolitan region, this urban landscape, is going to be a huge challenge as we move forward. And I think we're at a tipping point place in our history. You mentioned that feels like a small town. We know each other, right? And it does. Many times it'll feel like a small place. Oregon sometimes feels like a small place. But we are on the cusp of big city problems. And I'm not sure our governance structure is up to it. And so that probably worries me more than anything. My experience with the Institute of Metropolitan Studies told me that PSU is a great place naturally for convening multi-interest stakeholders in multidisciplinary problems. And I think if you read the paper, you'll read that multidisciplinary theme through the entire paper. And it is one of the characteristics of I think, an urban university that I think recognizes the challenges we face in a big city environment. And I can tell my joke here. Barbara Roberts, bless her heart, served a short stint on an interim basis on the Metro Council while I was the chief operating officer there. She was fond of telling me, Michael, we've caught all the 3-legged rabbits, which means we've solved all the easy problems. And the ones that are still out there are really fast, and it's going to take all of us working together to catch them. And I totally believe that's where we are. And I think that challenge of governance, PSU could provide a really great venue for us to work out some of these really challenging interdisciplinary problems.
Thanks, Michael. That's fantastic. And that's definitely, I mean, I do think you're right. And it is interesting because I think since 1972, we all have grown and we all see each other on the streets. There's just been so much of that compartmentalization. I think it's happened in Portland State, and it's one of the things that we need to tackle.
I'll just tell you, we can't collaborate with ourselves at Portland.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
you know,
right.
23 bureaus and nobody's in charge.
Yeah.
So this is not a pitch for the ballot measure. I'm not allowed to do that.
Right. There's been plenty of ink dedicated to those challenges. So I don't think you're treading in an unwelcome or uncharted waters. Fletcher, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of going to go into, I mean, I'm a sustainability person, so like climate comes to mind, but when I really think about the challenges I think about that we face, it comes back to how we work together or don't. And you know, we could have the best ideas about how to solve climate, and yet not know how to come together in a way that can actually move that forward. I think a lot of the things we get stuck up on right now is still going after the 3-legged rabbits, and this mentality that, you know, we'll just do this little incremental thing and not really organizing ourselves and our institutions around what's really necessary, which is massive transformation. So I mean, if you look at an issue like climate, we better be you know, looking at, you know, who's benefiting or not benefiting from major investments in a fundamentally new economy, and we better set our sights on an actual transformation. So 5% reduction in carbon emissions, like no, like if you look at the science, you know, we get to, you know, close to 100% you know, renewable energy, or some sort of actual transformation that's going to push our systems to create fundamentally new outcomes. And I think we still get caught up saying, not accepting that massive fact. And if you accept that fact, it also means that you go after how you build partnerships, how you build relationships fundamentally differently. And you're looking out across a decade or more, because that's what it's going to take. And it's going to take setting that out and then just very deliberately moving towards that transformation. And I think it takes patience. I think the political cycles we face as institutions make it hard, because people are cycled in. But I do think if we go back to PSU, we are here, we are of this place. I mean, most people don't also understand that most of our students come from this place, and then most of the students come right back to this place. So as we are training these students and they're working in the city, they are the current and the future citizens. I went to my grad school in New York, and like almost every single one of my classmates didn't stay in New York. They went all over the world. And so it's a different value proposition for why the city should invest in our students in this place. So I think PSU is going to be here. Like we're this anchor, and we have this opportunity to hold on to maybe some of those visions and to keep our region moving towards them. I also think we can do, I think we do a good job at this, but we can do even better at spending time being in community, being embedded, and building deep relationships. And that's not always just having to do a project or having to deliver on something, but also being able to spend time understanding the deep, intricate nature of some of the problems that we're trying to address, and really developing relationships that will allow us to eventually work on those things together.
Thanks. That was a good start. We certainly, I think, got a sense of the real complex challenges that we face together as a community. And I knew I wouldn't last my script too long, but I'll come back to it in a second. As I was thinking about it, all of the answers that you all gave, I think one of the threads is that maybe 50 years ago at the outset of urbanization, we had pretty simple problems to solve. That might not be entirely the case. I am curious about, but the siloing that's occurred, that really keeping everything compartmentalized now. I'm curious about what are some of the tools that we can use to start breaking, aside from obviously there's a charter, there's a discussion of the charter reform in a week and a half from now in this very room. But I'm just curious, outside of kind of those sorts of forced changes, what are some of the ways that we can start to be more collaborative? As an institution, you said we need to reach out more, Fletcher. What are the things, what and how do we do that? And I'm curious from the perspective of the commissioner, from the perspective of the city, what can we do to be more available for you, to support you as we tackle houselessness, as we tackle climate and the long-term impacts of climate? What are the barriers to us talking better and communicating better? Anyone want to dive into that one?
Well, it's when I talk with anyone at the city, commissioners and bureau directors and line staff and managers, I don't think I've had a conversation in the last 3 or 4 years where it hasn't been mentioned that they are incredibly busy and understaffed and can't get their regular work done and just feel overwhelmed. And so we need to make space for change. I'm fond of telling people that when someone is in the kind of situation that I hear over and over and over again, it's like being in a straitjacket. And you can't move in a straitjacket. And if you can't move, you can't change. And so we've got to find a way to make space for the kind of dialogue that's going to be necessary, the kind of outreach and intimacy that Fletcher was alluding to regarding our institutions and our different institutions and how we we've just got to get in close proximity to each other more often on challenging issues. And it needs to be facilitated, and we've all got our own baggage. We've been carrying it around our whole lives. And I got plenty of rocks in my backpack that I need to unload. But if we don't stay in the room and continue to work at them, we're never going to get there. And so I think making space in an intentional way for us to be in proximity with each other around these big challenges is, I think, the only way we ultimately build trust and we can collaborate better. And it's, some of it is not malevolent, it's because we're just so damn busy doing what we do every day, getting the beer out. And we got to make some space for these bigger challenges, or we're just going to be, right one step away from the grave, doing the same thing we've been doing for the last 40 years in our careers.
I was having very similar thoughts, so I'm gonna have to try to say them in different words. No, I mean, I think I was reflecting on what you said, Fletcher, about the underlying challenge, no matter what the substantive area is, about our increasing difficulty of coming together and bridging divides. And, go back to the Denmark example. I was so struck by the fact that in Denmark, they have reached consensus on the fact that climate change exists and that it's human caused. And they have figured out how to have industry work together with community organizations, work together with academia. And here I think we see polarization around the substance, and we also see the sort of siloization that I think Mike was talking about. And so the idea of the university as a convener, the idea of the university doing not only what you said, Fletcher, which I do think is crucial, which is that the university itself is out embedded in community in a consistent and ongoing way, not just in a project-based way, but also perhaps playing a role in having the different parts of our community coming together in the kind of proximity that Michael was describing in a consistent way. So I do come back to this, the paper talked about research and applied research, and I do come back to the idea of the role that PSU can play as convener across a number of different forums as essential.
I think I wanted to also kind of score this idea of making space. I think is this massive like management challenge, I feel like, too, at a time when we have so much going on. Like, we actually have to help each other let some things go. And I think that's the way you make space, right? You don't make space by just like saying, I've got this big pile of stuff, I'm gonna put more stuff on the, I think that's just creates more stress. And so like it's interesting, you're a strengths-based leadership consultant, because I am too. And when I coach someone to think about a change in their life, the first thing to think about is like, what's going on in your life? And is it too congested to even think about something new? And I think we have to like have more of those conversations, not just about, oh man, what's all the stuff you're doing, but actually kind of celebrating someone being able to let go of something and be like, well, maybe that isn't a priority, and find ways to support each other in letting go of things so that we can really invest in the things where we can have that impact. And I'm hopeful of a world where we can center around a few things together that really can push us forward as a city in the region and unite us. And I don't think we can make progress on those things unless that list is fairly focused. So that process of letting go, I think, is just so critical. We just can't keep just doing more. We're just going to suffocate. I also want to mention kind of, so the idea of convener, when I think about partnerships a lot, I think about the idea of like mutual understanding, and how are we giving ourselves enough space together, not just to absorb what people are doing and those like surface level facts, but to understand who they are, what their motivations are, how they come to the work, like to understand more about who they are as a person, as a human. Because I feel like we have lots of shields we put up, and the only way we kind of start putting those down a little bit is if we have enough time to kind of to be in space together. And so that's like a slow process, but that's the process that then opens up the door to really doing something exciting together.
trying to think what to add. It's amazing how it resonates out of, I spent the first hour of my morning in one of our leadership development courses, and they were talking about a particular, I don't know if I should pull out their case, but it was around Columbia Basin River, which you can imagine has taken lots of multi-stakeholder governance exact questions. And so they were wrestling with a lot of these same things, and they were actually comparing an effort that had not succeeded with one that has. And some of what you've just described, Fletcher, of they thought they could sort of jump in once they had identified this first group and move to content, and that wasn't at all their lived cross experience. Was that it took that time to step back and build trust, but it really was bringing people together. So I think it's not only convening for these conversations, but setting that intentionality of whose voices haven't been part of the conversation, and then also making sure we talked about multidisciplinary, but that we're like cross sector. But I think we're well positioned to do that, right? Because we're multidisciplinary, we have connections with business, we have connections with nonprofit. I think of all of our professional associations, the Special Districts Association of Oregon, and the counties and the cities. And so being able to really look at all of those, the image in the first plan that the paper was writing on is kind of showing those benchmarks of education and economy. And so I just hope, I'm excited of that idea of what it could bring to bring like the academic grounding and the practitioners is what we do on a daily basis. But if it was at the institutional level, like institution to institution, instead of program to program, I think it's there. But you're right, we have to pick a few things, because otherwise carving out that time, to bring people together. So we didn't say it would be easy.
That being said, I actually think people are energized by the idea, right? I think, Michael, you bring a good point. And the Denmark delegation was in town last week. They made their way back over to this side, and we hosted one of those sessions here at Portland State. There were sessions that were hosted around the region. And as I listened to this conversation, it really does crystallize a role that Portland State can play as a convener, because I will say, the 20 minutes that I sat in that large room of folks talking about climate change, where we had Vigor, we had EVRAS, and then we had the community-based organizations. Often you see them sparring and online or in all of these new venues we have to display our differences. And all of a sudden you pull everybody together and the light bulbs come on, literally in this sense, and figuratively, around how actually, if we all sit around and have a cup of coffee and talk about it, there's often so many places where we can come to agreement, and so many great ideas come out of those moments. So again, it's just a reminder that we need to make sure that we continue to offer our community those opportunities to come together, because so many good things come out of it. And really, I think if we have just one takeaway from this conversation, that might be one of the best as we emerge from this period of isolation we've been in. It's probably exacerbated all of these challenges so much, because it just was such a refreshing thing to watch. And I just so vividly remember, and we talked about it just this morning in our team meeting, the person that was there from Vigor chatting with the person that was there from Verde about, wow, we need to do that, right? And boy, it would sure be great if we had some research that informed this decision that we both want to see, because we're just speculating on things right now. So really appreciate that. I'm gonna move for a second to talk a little bit about the another really core focus of our institution is the students. And the paper doesn't spend a lot of time talking about the impact that students can have in our community, but I think at its heart, right, there's 200,000 alumni, most of whom, as Fletcher said earlier, over 120,000 of them live in our region. There's a cohort of almost 20,000 students here now today, What are some of the things that you all think they need to be focused on as they're preparing to be impactful, both members of the workforce and ultimately, we've got a couple here today, leaders in our community. So I'm not sure who wants to dive into kind of what are the top line messages you say to students, what are the things you should be thinking about right now?
Get as many varied experiences you can get. The world of specialization is leaving us slowly, and the world of generalists is coming. And to be a leader today is such a different thing than it was 50 years ago. You know, I'm fond of telling people that Teddy Roosevelt and the horse he rode in on are dead, and they're never coming back. To be a leader in today's society, well, take Oregon. We're maybe in the most democratic state in the most democratic nation on the planet, where anybody with $250,000 and a kitchen table can get us all to vote on something that goes into our Constitution forever. That's access. Plus, we've been socialized in the post-World War II era by $100 billion a year in advertising, bombarding us that we can have anything we want, any way we want it, anytime we want it. Imagine trying to lead a society that thinks that way. And in Oregon, we all hate power. We don't want anybody to have enough power to do anything by themselves. And so, what characteristics do you have to be a leader in that kind of society? And it is not, you know, the charismatic leader will not be the answer in the future. How do you bring people together in a fractionalized society that thinks they can get it their way no matter what? And if they can't get it their way, they'll try to change venue on you. It takes a special way of approaching people and approaching institutions to move an agenda forward. And so I say, get them out as much as you can in as many different kinds of environments as you can be in, and try to understand them as best you can while you're a student here.
Jumping down the line, it puts me in mind, I mean, since I'm sitting right between local government, then I'm remiss, you know, that's like our emeritus faculty, and those are some of the publications out of our Center for Public Service, our new public leadership in that sense. So right away, I'm thinking again about wicked problems, and we have an emerge framework. It's that idea, like we don't get a template for solving wicked problems. And so definitely the students have to grapple with that sense of like, show me the frame. And it's like, there is no frame now, and it really is towards that. So collaborative governance, our National Policy Consensus Center, and really understanding how to work with other people, and you know, how to be able to assess and figure out that adaptive style. Thinking also of just the times we're in, and artificial intelligence and changing workforce right now coming out of the pandemic. We've been talking, you know, lots of emphasis on workplace 2.0 and hybrid work environment, but there's still the in AI, I think of, and part of how I got into the strengths-based piece, but then also thinking about the emotional intelligence side, are sort of this idea, I think the frame is STEMpathy jobs, but the idea of STEM, but what can be done by AI versus what do you still need people, is the emotional intelligence aspect, right? And so what a computer system can do, scanning metadata for identifying, you know, if something is cancerous, but do you want the computer to deliver the message once you have that information? Or just thinking of how those pieces play together. So I'm thinking a lot of, again, towards PSU's strength. I think that's much broader than only the College of Urban and Public Affairs. I would say the colleagues across this campus are really focused on what you're describing, of having students in, engaged learning so that they get that applied. But it does matter in the, that is a community partnership opportunity to have those ongoing relationships for how students have meaningful, whether it's like a 509 capstone project or whether, there's lots of discussion right now of not having unpaid internships. So, finding the balance that makes that, but I think that's a really great example of where we have the embedded, like, I think was the word that you used, Fletcher, so that it's not project by project emphasis. But those are some responses. I don't know.
I find myself going pretty tactical and specific. So I have adult children and, I observe just a growing cynicism and lack of trust and faith in government and in government's ability to solve problems. And so I think getting out and getting to know your local governments, obviously, this is in my self-interest that you get to know your local governments, but really understanding how your governments work, what they do, who runs them and how are they run. And looking for the opportunities to do that. Show up and testify at City Hall, show up and testify at the county on an issue that you really care about. And that means that you've got to research it. So there's the learning piece. You've got to research that issue. You've got to come up with some ideas and then come and present them to us because we want to hear them. And also, I think, as Sarah said, take advantage of the sort of channels that exist now to get involved in government. And we've got an internship program. It's a paid internship, college to county. Kevin, you and I talked about it a little while ago. Seek out those opportunities to understand what government does. And then you can still be cynical, but you'll have a basis on which to be cynical.
I love that. I will say, that's the joy of an urban university, right? I think the paper so clearly articulates, right, the value proposition of an urban university, and that's it. I mean, a lot of what you're talking about, I'll let you chime in here in a second, Fletcher, is really about that. I mean, that's the great moment we have here, right? We're in the middle of this vibrant community, and our students, if they're not taking advantage of it, I mean, they're just not going to get the richness of the experience of being at this institution. And it so clearly ties into their ability to take on leadership roles. So I love all of those answers, and I do think there's lessons there, reminders for us institutionally. And I think we do such a good job of getting our students out of the community of just how valuable that is. So I jumped in, Fletcher. Anything you want to add to that?
You couldn't allow for the 2 second.
I could.
But I kind of jump on a little bit what Mike was saying, because I think this idea of the urban is inherently interdisciplinary. Like everything we look at is weaving all these pieces together. It's not this hermetically sealed box. It's complex and messy and hard. And I think that is the opportunity of PSU, is to expose our students to that, but also find ways in which our research can support that. I think we're at a time when there's a lot of ways where there's a lot of side, you can pick a side very easily. You can just pick a side. And I think encouraging our students, and like we have a university studies goal of, not creative thinking, but critical thinking, but to question things and not to fall into those moments of cognitive ease, but to truly be curious and to push at kind of just, if someone's giving you an answer, being able to politely like have a dialogue about it. I feel like we're in a point where it's really hard sometimes. There's so many wicked issues where you have to show up in a specific way that we can't even talk about it. And like, if we can't talk about it, we're not going to do anything about it. Like, it's just going to further entrench. And so being able to talk about things and disagree, and teaching our students how to be part of that is probably the most important thing we can do, is giving them those experiences to be in critical dialogue. I mean, I'm a big proponent of applied learning and internships, especially paid internships. I think that's a huge component of this in terms of career pathways for students. But I just think about this ability for us to give venues for students to be curious and to deeply understand like our institutions, so that then you can actually be critical of them and to know like, yeah, I think that's broken because I've looked at it, it looked broken to me, as opposed to just saying, hey, like, that's broken because someone else told me it's broken. Because the process of figuring out if it's broken or not, or whatever, somewhere in between, it's probably somewhere in between, is actually a big part of the learning journey. And that process then I think teaches, and I think we're all on that, we're all students in that, and teaches us a lot about how we can actually come together.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things I think about a lot is I look at a table of folks that have really, figured out how to leave their mark in our community is decision making. One of the things I think often about, and Michael, you said this at the very outset, right? Sometimes we're so busy talking, we can't make a decision. And I always worry, I have a 21-year-old that so many decisions get made for him through this or whatever it is, that it's like, sometimes that ability to make a decision, it seems like that's a really important and vital role that we have as educators. It's like, okay, here's the actual process of getting there, making a decision. So all of that put together, they're really reinforces for me. Just boy, get folks in here, get them out there, teach them how to be an active member of society, and then give them the tools to make good decisions. So appreciate all of that feedback, and I think it for me just reinforces the value proposition of going in and giving students all of those opportunities. So thank you. I'm going to turn my attention back to the paper for a second, and we look back over 50 years from that paper, and I think the paper highlighted a lot of the really extraordinary progress we've made over the past, since 1972. But Sarah, at the outset, you identified that that was at the expense sometimes of other members of our community, right? That growth that we've seen. So I am curious, as we look out over the next 50 years, how do we ensure that we are making progress without making progress that lifts all of us, and acknowledges the really incredible impact we've had on our communities of color, kind of left them behind so often, created pathways to gentrification in our community. What are the things we can do as we contemplate the next 50 years to ensure we don't have that happen? That we're doing so mindfully, thoughtfully, intentionally. What are the steps we need to take? And what's PSU's role in helping to move that all forward?
I'm happy to kick that one off because I think it's such an important question. To me, the first thing, and this is a place that's just so logical for PSU to occupy. The first thing is understanding our history. That's actually come up at the county in a number of different ways just over the past couple of weeks, but really, really understanding our history, understanding the very painful parts of our history, and disseminating that information kind of at every turn, I think is absolutely the key. And then this is something that we work on a lot. I think we have to be intentional about, if we are going to undo the legacy of colonization, if we're going to undo the legacy of systemic racism, we have to do it in an intentional and focused way. And that means that we have to articulate that race is at the root of those of colonization and institutionalized discrimination, and then intentionally build race into our planning processes. And I think of things that are already happening. I think of the city's North by Northeast housing strategy, which provides preferences to Black families that were displaced from Northeast Portland. I think it might still be one of the most unique in the country in terms of doing that, and can be risky and controversial, but I think that's what needs to happen. I think of there's an effort to create a new tax increment financing district in Northeast Portland, the Cully TIF. We know that those districts were responsible for much of the displacement that we've seen over the last 30 or 40 years. So how do we use the same tool but do it differently? And this is community-based. The community is coming up with the planning for this TIF district. So to me, it's about acknowledging history, continuing to not lose sight of what that history is, as painful as it might be, not just centering the voices of those most affected, but creating leadership that comes from the voices of those who've been most impacted to develop the alternative for how we do it differently going forward.
Other thoughts?
We, most of us that have worked in the public sector for our careers have been socialized into, yeah, it's practically printed in our DNA that we must treat everyone equally. Equality is our goal. And I think we're really realizing in the last couple of decades that that might not be the case. That might not be the best outcome that we can get to. And moving from equality to equity is a huge challenge for us in the public sector. But I think Commissioner's points are right on. How you make decisions, who you involve in the dialogue, how you break down kind of traditional power dynamics in communities. And I think Cully is a great example of taking a tool that can be very powerful, especially in an urban setting, and bringing the people together who 50 years ago that tool would have oppressed them and maybe destroyed their neighborhood, to use the tool now to rebuild it and make it better at their kind of decision making and their inquiry and their getting to their conclusions about what's good for that neighborhood is a way to deal with equity and not equality across an urban landscape when you can apply those tools in the appropriate way. I'm you know, we're all on a journey. I'm at a place in mind that I am beginning to question the underpinnings of American democracy and American capitalism and how they work with each other to actually concentrate power and wealth and not distribute it in a way that we would hope it does. And so I think for us who think about the decisions we make and the impacts they have in community, I think there needs to be that underlying understanding that if we just make decisions unintentionally, without thought about those outcomes, really intense thought about those outcomes, you know, the momentum of American democracy and American capitalism carry us in the wrong direction unless we're incredibly intentional about what outcome we're trying to get to. And I think we do it almost unconsciously. And so the role for Portland State potentially, at least for those of us who are in the business of making decisions about community every day, is to remind us that we have to continue to keep our eye on the ball, or the momentum of our society will carry us in the wrong direction.
I guess, so both deep pieces I feel we could sit with, but it's just making me think of the work around the system it intentionally doesn't name those pieces, right? So you're building around privilege and it privileges some and oppresses others, then it takes away. And so I think the ongoing conversations we have about how to have these dialogues, like just in there's a national, it's the consortium of public university I'm saying this out of order now, university public service organizations just had their directors meeting last week in Arlington, and talking about when universities are trying to do this work with partners and then being told what we can and can't talk about. We've seen it in previous, I don't want to like turn it political, but previous like federal level administrations of this idea of, what's part of the curriculum even, right? And what language that we use, and can we talk about the goal of equity, or do we talk about implicit bias, or do we talk about, and so it's it takes a lot to keep building shared vocabulary. And so when we're convening those conversations and that idea that we can code switch or style flex to talk to one audience and then come over and talk effectively, but now we're trying to bridge and facilitate across those differences. And it's, I wish I wouldn't have to, I believe it's lifelong work, although I wish we could get to some transformational, pieces within our lifetimes. But that, I think there's that piece, like I mentioned before, PSU's got its, new plan for equity and racial justice through 2024. And I think it's that each institution doing its internal work that needs sort of to model the way, and then being able to provide that in technical assistance and support to other, organizations. And I think from the university standpoint, I was turning to colleagues, like it's not my piece, but I was thinking of like Toulon School of Urban and Public Affairs. I'm pretty sure there's that example of like the city's Bureau of Planning and Sustainability commissioned the report in 2013, and Dr. Lisa Bates of the school authored the report of implementing equitable inclusive development strategy in the context of gentrification. So you watch how back to that like public impact research. Okay, so can we provide some evidence-based and have that inform, policy going forward? So when we're talking about those institutional collaborations of really letting the research be part of it, but we have to keep up too, so that we've got that, I don't know, that as an institution we're there. And I think there's something to it of, I think we talk like decolonizing knowledge itself, right? Like what we recognize, academia itself gets critiqued of, being the elite and that side. And so what do we do to open that conversation and recognize other ways of knowing, and how we bring all that together, which I think is part of that community engaged, but one more element to keep alive in the conversation. So Fletcher, bring
I just,
us
yeah,
in,
I think you connected also back to kind of, so this, I believe Kevin can correct me. So I think not this fall, but the previous fall was the first time when our freshman class is more than 50% students of color. And so like our city is diversifying, and PSU is an example of that. And I think as we think about, as we work on programs that are, supporting all students, but I think about a specific program that's supporting students that have kind of been left out of STEM pathways. And part of starting those conversations with those students is how we probably need to start more conversations, which is, what is your experience, and go into that history, and not just their history, but also their experience as a student in this moment right now, which is likely very different than my experience, and having more time and more patience to deeply see those moments and where people are coming from, I think does a lot. And so the word patience that you said, Mike, I think is a critical one. And like, it's this balance of patience and urgency. And I go back to this idea of transformation, that like, if we can get clear on that direction we're trying to go, then we can actually have some patience in the near term, because we're building the foundation to do something transformative. And I worry that sometimes we're like, well, here's the tool, like just apply the tool. And you actually haven't done the work to like change yourself as well in that process, which is really where this stuff is rooted. It's changing our own practice so that it can change the way we throw out policies. But I also think I have a tremendous amount of hope in terms of our ability also at PSU and other places to create the space where we can also cultivate this next generation of leaders who are gonna be the ones that are moving these really hard, complex things forward, and hopefully towards outcomes that are closing equity gaps and bringing us closer together as a community.
Yeah, boy, I sure think there's an opportunity for institutional collaboration in this space, right? I think we have an emerging population, a wonderful group of students here that are our community's next leaders. And the pathway to that leadership opportunity so often starts at the county or the city, right? As they take both their own, the lessons of their own lives and their families into those spaces. And what I think one of our biggest challenges is that often, but what we hear so often is students come back and say, I'm being asked to adapt to that space, and that space is unwilling to understand that there's a different way to do it. And so I think that, again, what I heard, right, is Mike, you kind of alluded to that right out of the gate, and the piece around, leadership has to change. Boy, how are we gonna do that? How are we gonna make sure that we're both creating a pathway for our new leadership, a new, much more diverse leadership, and that we're finding opportunities to change ourselves in the middle of it. How are we gonna, what are the things that we ought to be doing as leaders in our respective spaces to change the way we behave, create more opportunity for these students? I wonder if anyone has ideas or just seen some of these things happening again. Commissioner, you talked about some of the programs that you have there.
Yeah, I mean, I find myself going on a bunch of different threads as you were talking. One is in thinking about what is the kind of space that this next generation of leaders needs in order to thrive. I think a lot about language and our use of phrases like inclusion. It's not sitting well with me these days, inclusion, because inclusion indicates it's based on I am including somebody else into my space. And I think about it, this might be a little bit facile, but I think about it like a dinner party, right? I mean, we want to make our home inclusive and welcoming to people, but we're setting the table, we're deciding what's on the table, we're deciding what the table looks like. And so, at the county, we've really moved to this language of safety, trust, and belonging as being, that's what we're trying to achieve. And diversity, equity, inclusion are essential to safety, trust, and belonging, but they're not sufficient. So I guess that's one reflection I have on your comments. And in terms of what is it that we need to do ourselves, I think pushing ourselves to share our own stories. Whatever that story is, when we as leaders share our stories, that creates the space for others to share theirs. And I think the ability to share those stories is really, really important to creating that sense of safety, trust, and belonging. It's something I've been pushing myself on. I'm an introvert, I'm a private person. And so, but really, I've watched over these 4 years at the county of how when people do that, it makes an incredible difference to people feeling safety, trust, and belonging, and not just included.
Well, no doubt telling your story is important, but just, doing the job and demonstrating the pathway is also, I think, so important. People want to see, they want to see impactful opportunities and see themselves and other spaces. Any other thoughts?
I mean, I'm a big fan of also like kind of rethinking how we mindfully how we might restructure organizations. So I'm I do some work on shared leadership, which is looking at more non-hierarchical leadership systems, and I especially think when we're facing really complex challenges, if you are able to find I think it takes more time to build up systems that are, I mean, hierarchies are here for a reason, right? They're very simple. It's like, this is the person in charge, I go yell at that person, right? Or that person gets celebrated. And shared leadership is kind of takes more time to develop levels of alignment across multiple people with multiple histories, multiple ways of working. And at the same time, it has tremendous power because it allows us to kind of depressurize what that job is and create more space for other people. And what I also think, like, if you look at some of the challenges we're facing right now in our world, like, people are changing jobs like crazy. And so if you're seeing organizations that are, if you're believing the trend in the future that we're seeing more shifting, then we need to find ways to make sure that that institutional knowledge is also not completely evaporated. And that if, once again, as I said in my earlier comments, if we're building towards transformation, towards these long-term agendas of change, we need to have enough common foundation that can be built upon over time. And so thinking about shared leadership systems that share power, but also give us ability to go through change and learning quicker is something I'm super interested in. And it's tricky and it's not easy, and we have a lot of reasons why it's hard, but I think finding ways to experiment with that, and to my earlier point, where leaders can let go a little bit and realize that, things might not go perfectly, but part of the letting go creates space for others to make those mistakes, to learn and to grow. And that really we envision a world in the future where there's a whole lot more people that like put leader by their identity. And yeah, so I don't know, I don't have a roadmap for it, but but I think some experimentation, but experimentation in that space, I think is really critical for getting to different outcomes and making sure that more people can be brought into those types of roles.
You know, I think we've talked about internships and getting the students out into the world and different situations. I'm trying to think of an experience, but I don't think I've ever had the experience of having a student in my workplace where I felt like I had made a commitment to that student's experience before they showed up. And I'm wondering about the university, you know, insisting on a joint commitment to create the kind of environment for a student that can allow them. I was struck by when you said students come back and they say, I went to this place and they tried to make me like them. They didn't allow me to be who I am or in that space. And I think you need to do a little bit of preloading of expectations when we are working with a student. And I don't think we do enough of that. I realize it takes time and energy, but it also, I think, is a sign of the commitment of the people who are going to receive that student into the space, and have us having a common understanding of what we're trying to help that student with and the environment we want to create for them to flourish. And I don't feel like I don't think I've been very intentional sometimes when I've had a student come into my space, and we kind of end up making it up as we go along. But I think it would be so much better if we had a common understanding between the university and the institution that the student's going to go into, to say, here's what we're trying to accomplish here and really help and create that kind of environment. So maybe there's a way for us to tweak the normal way we deposit students into institutions and be a little more intentional about that.
Yeah, to the safety, trust, and belonging, that every student that comes in like feels safe, feels like they belong, and they can express themselves and is able to grow trust. I mean, I like that framing a lot. So I don't think that is necessarily the norm.
Right.
It's kind of like you get thrown in, like figure it out, right? And I think organizations have a lot to learn also from that student energy and that question, and like that. It's not just about the organization once again teaching the student how to fit in this thing. It's the organization learning how to change, maybe too.
Yeah, boy, that we have a shared obligation there.
Yeah,
for sure. For this next generation of workforce.
and it's also a way for us to be in closer proximity to each other more often.
Well, those are some really helpful and thoughtful comments. I'm just really grateful. Thank you. I'm gonna take us away from a really that kind of super important, but you know, obviously we've got a lot of challenges there. Let's go blue sky again for just a second, as we're kind of rounding into the last probably 15-30 minutes here. I want to give an opportunity for folks to ask any questions if they have any, but the paper does kind of towards the end of it say, as I said earlier, right, what is the next 50 years going to look like? And it poses a couple of questions. One of the questions it poses is, what will it mean for Portland and this region to succeed in the years ahead? I am curious. I mean, how do we define success as we look out over the next 5 or 6 years? What does that look like for each of you?
5 or 6 years.
Make it 10 years. Well, just as a preview, the next one is going to be longer than that. So the next question is going to say, you know, kind of 50 years from now, when we look back, what are the, so I'll pose it in 2 parts, then I'll front load it. You know, question 1 is, what will it mean for Portland and this region to succeed in the years ahead? Straight out of the paper. And question 2, when the story of this urban region is told 50 years from now, you know, what will be the story of success and what will be PSU's place in it? So.
You know, I'm fond of telling people that we're 10 years from being Seattle and 20 years from being San Francisco. And if we don't find a way to redistribute wealth and income and the opportunity in our region, we will run on the same trajectory as other major urban areas. And I think we still have the ability to change that narrative. And I think it is again a structural issue that it will take all of our best efforts to figure out how to get on a different trajectory so that you can have a middle wage job and a house and send your kids to college and have health care and be able to get around and do it in a way that doesn't damage the climate. You know, and I don't have answers to that, but I'm not sure those of us who deliver public services every day, I'm not sure we're even thinking about that question very much. And again, the tyranny of the now takes us away. And maybe, you know, the narrative of the next 50 years, if I can jump ahead, and PSU's part is that they held the mirror up to us and forced us to face those questions in a deliberative and intentional way with the support of great research.
Let's stick on external
Sure,
like,
perspective
first, or
sure. I guess I will go completely blue sky. I don't remember exactly how you phrased the question, but you know, I think for me, the vision of what it looks like for this area to succeed is that it truly is a just place. And so that includes the idea of redistribution of income and wealth, you know, economic justice, of it being a place where people have the material resources they need to live fulfilling lives without worrying about their basic needs. But it includes, includes environmental justice, it includes people having neighborhoods with parks and clean air to breathe. So it includes housing justice. So I end up with a long list of things. And then I think what brings it all together for me is that both in order to do those things and as a result of those things, we have a civic society, we have communities that are in relationship with each other in a different way. And that if we don't have those relationships, we won't get there. And that's just, and that's an essential component to the sense of well-being and people thriving, you know. I almost have a mental image of it that I'm not describing very well, but really a thriving, diverse community in relationship with each other. And we can't get there if we don't address those issues of justice.
Well, it does seem like, I mean, and it's so funny because it seems kind of gloom and doom. I mean, the fact is we all love living here, right? It is such a wonderful, vibrant community. And I think I often think of exactly as you're saying, right? So much of that is how do we make sure we protect? And I think that's where you start on this, Michael, that vibrancy, that sense that while we address some of these other really vexing challenges, right? There's just so much inequity right now, so many of those justices that we're not tackling. So you know, how do you protect that what makes Portland so special while tackling really difficult. Other thoughts?
guess I'm just like, I think we have ingredients of what makes it special, of sort of the natural environment around us and some of these initial, but I don't know, I found myself acting a little to the protection because we've been talking throughout this conversation of the ways that systems were designed in all of what we're talking about of government education. And so to reach that vision, I shared a lot of, I know I was going, okay, well, this is less from like a professional and more just a personal, like, what would it be like to be in a space where every living thing is thriving? The humans are thriving, the environment around us is thriving. We have the clean river that they were talking about in the original plan. And a lot of it, you know, for me, I am imagining sort of all of these universal, like that our safety net isn't tied to employment. And so a lot of those we just had, was that only a week ago? I don't know, my PSU colleagues, we just had the universal childcare conversation down in our Parsons gallery, you know. So when I think of those types of things of universal pre-K and universal healthcare and long-term care and all of these pieces that we're working towards on the like social, and then looking at that intersection with climate, and then the role back in there is, I think, that bringing the multidisciplinary approaches and those cross-sector stakeholders and folks that haven't, like, rightfully might not trust government institutions and might not trust academic institutions, right? So when we talk about these partnerships, like, we might be responsible in a convener role and have to look for where can we convene that isn't perceived as the academy. We might need to be out of, you know, that we are in and of the city, but also out of, you know, these particular blocks of the city, you know, and going to others. But I think a lot of co-creation, like, so combining that academically grounded in the practice centered knowledge. And I think a lot of our role is what we've been describing through many of these questions of developing public service leaders. So we're talking about, you know, who, if these are our next, you know, leaders coming out of Portland State, and Fletcher, you're sharing the statistics that yes, they're staying, living here and working here. And so, you know, what through these institutional relationships, let them become effective and ethical and innovative leaders. And I think that we've got a lot of those types of programs responding to, you know, thinking about, okay, when I have to think 50 years ahead, I'm hoping it's not already been the big one. And I'm hoping that the state, like the work that we've been doing towards building community resilience, that we are a more resilient, you know, community. And, you know, watching the smoke out the window today. So, but we've got those types of building, like the emergency management and community resilience graduate certificate, or energy policy and management and food systems, and, you know, all of these components, but like the ingredients are all here. But clearly we still have to bring them together in some new ways.
We got a lot of chefs, right? I don't know, I've been pretty fascinated. We do, so we're over 50% of our students are transfer. I think that's the right number. So like, especially, so PCC is a major partner. And like, if you look at PCC, they have all these campuses. And I think 50 years out, and I think PSU, yeah, we're here and we got 8 campuses across this community. And we've redoubled our effort to be the place that that anchors and helps bring this community together. Just one of the places, obviously it happens in many places, but that we're that consistent force, and that we're increasingly embedded, not just in downtown Portland, but throughout the city. And a lot of our faculty do, you know, wonderful work throughout. But I think about this like physical presence that is distributed. I especially think about kind of where we're going, like think about East Portland and like having a just strong presence that are throughout our city. I also think about how like this idea of connectedness, and that I think a lot of people love living here, and I think some people don't. I think some people are really struggling, and I actually think under COVID, for a variety of reasons, that brought that struggling to even more people. It exacerbated everything, and somehow that we all started, even more people were feeling that struggling. But I just being a citizen of Portland, I feel like I feel like that struggle is even more real right now than during my time here than ever. I've only been here for 15 years, and I know there's a long story there. But I see us like being able to turn that corner, and instead of us going further from each other, going closer to each other over time. And I think to your point, as we get closer, we can find those places where we can have justice and where we can build more stronger mutual understanding and actually be able to solve problems together a lot better. I also think about education and like how PSU needs to even double down further on its mission, kind of as for social mobility. I think we're #1 in Oregon in terms of how much students are making coming in compared to where they're coming out, and we need to deliver even at a higher level that mission, supporting people in getting degrees and good jobs, and ideally here to get some of the things you were talking about, Mike. And so that mission needs to continue to grow because there is way more need than we're even able to address right now, and that can be a huge way to close in our city and make sure we're actually moving towards something we all want to be a part of in the future.
And if I could add just a little piggyback on that, I think that's one of the to me, one of the clearest and most concrete places of collaboration between PSU and local government. You are training, you are educating a workforce. We have good jobs. And there are so many places, the county, the last time I asked, we had 600 vacant positions. Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's just a very tangible place for continued collaboration.
Yeah. And we need to do a lot better there in terms of us like closing that gap.
Right.
Because we got a lot of students that need good jobs.
Yeah, we do. I mean, I'd love to. What is the way that we close that gap, and how do we think about addressing that acute need? Exists not just the county, right?
Mhm.
There's just so many
600 positions in the police bureau.
Yeah.
It feels like it.
How many would you estimate the city?
200. Well, we're at least 600 vacancies. Yeah.
I think
Our
that
vacancy rate now is running almost 14%. Wow, that's about double what it was pre-pandemic.
that's the ICMA arm, the Mission Square Research. If you search like their reports, they have all the local government sector piece. And to your description of, hey, you might be cynical, so come
Mhm.
check it out firsthand. I think there's also just that sense we've seen the demand, but then it's also linking like what are one of the centers did a really interesting project recently mapping like what the students are interested in, like what are the pathways that you'd like to see. And they were more, I'm trying to remember which state they were in, but it was a more rural type of piece. And so they're talking about like dairy industry was really a primary driver. But so what they were doing was helping map, like you want to do graphic design, and that's needed because like people were picturing like going out and milking the cows and not sort of having the sense of all of what was required across
You
that.
can
And
draw
so
pictures of cows.
but the role that the university in that case was playing was bridging that, like this is what we see from your survey results that you're interested in, and this is how. And I think some of that, just because we're specifically at that intersection with local government and nonprofit and like public service, is letting people understand the breadth of what's available within that is a huge piece. So not to focus there solely, like we want private sector and other to be strong here, but some of it is just that helping connect the dots. I think you're asking what's the very direct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I worry so frequently that, we have, in addition to the huge increase in our students of color that we have, so many of our students are first generation students. And there's just some assumption out there, oh yeah, you just know how to get a job. Right? Oh yeah, just go down to the county and get that job. One of those 600 jobs that's available. I think that's such an important role for us to work on collectively, right? How do we make sure that the door is open for that student, that they understand that they have the confidence?
Yeah.
We break down all of those barriers that like, oh no, I could never get that job, or how do we start that developing that trust?
Yeah, and I think there are just very specific things that we can do when we start examining those questions. For example, I mentioned the college to county program that we have. I think we have about 55 students per summer in that program. And recently I was in a conversation and we asked, well, what if, but what we know, I think the percentage of those folks that actually get jobs at the county is relatively low. What if we said that if you've been through College to County, you automatically get interviewed? We're not guaranteeing you a job, but you automatically get interviewed. You don't go through the process of, the sort of the culling process.
Right.
It's like, that's a really specific thing that we could do. And similarly, I think there are probably things that Portland State could do.
Yeah. There's gotta be things like that
Yeah.
that we need to be doing right now, just to make sure that we've created that smooth on-ramp to, every one of the folks that is here wants their students to be the next generation of leaders, and it's just like, how do we make sure? Give them the tools they need, give them the confidence they need, and give them the opportunity that they need. So that's great. Well, I have one more question, and don't leave, folks. We're going to leave a couple of minutes here to get any questions from the folks that are out there. Yesterday, we posted a new job at this institution, speaking of workforce, for our 11th president. So the university president announced that he's going to be retiring, and it's an opportunity for us to have someone else coming in. I am curious. I suspect several of you will have the opportunity to chat with that new leader when they arrive. But I'm going to ask you to think now about what you might say to our 11th president. What's the advice that you might have, or the recommendations you might have for that 11th president to make sure that PSU is impactful as those visionary leaders contemplated in 1972?
Happy to start. I would say, first of all, be bold. Do what it is we've been advising students to do, which is actually go out into the community, make those connections, understand, how this community works. And I think this isn't just for PSU, but for any institution, articulate the core values and then be really disciplined and intentional about making sure that those values are reflected in every decision. And I think from decisions small to large, and that sounds maybe a bit trite or easy to say. And I think that in the discipline, though, of actually applying those values to every decision that you make, that's how you actually act on those values.
Remember that Portland State University is the metropolitan university. And it's not just about Portland. This is a pretty diverse urban landscape. And the students I know come from all over, but they certainly don't all come from the city of Portland. And so be present across the entire metroscape. And then the second thing I would say is stay in your lane. There are lots of things that lots of people can do in an organization, but there's probably only a few things the president can do. And try to focus your time and energy on things that only you can do. I think all of us as leaders struggle with that. The work just takes over. And by the way, it's very seductive work and we all love it. That's why we do it. And it'll suck every minute of every day out of you. So be very discerning about the things that only you as the leader of the university can do.
I've been thinking back, well, I'm looking, Fletcher, just because you mentioned the strengths-based coaching, and there's a piece in Gallup's research of what followers need. And I think we could all use more hope, trust, compassion, and giving that sense of confidence to the campus community. And I mean that as like the full metropolitan community, not just, internally during what we hope is the next transformational phase. Clearly, we will first say, watch this series of panel discussions
right.
on the role of an
Learn.
urban university. That will be, yeah.
The 10 hours.
Well,
It's too much coming in.
Yeah, they'll fast forward for me.
But no, I do think there's just some work back to that co-creation of a shared mission and co-creation across like our the organization, but the larger community. I would word a little bit of what you're describing is, we can't do it all. And so how do we focus on what it is that we do best? And we've been talking about some of what that is that we do best. But there are trade-offs in being like a ranked research university versus, access and prioritizing social mobility and these sides. And so obviously an integrated approach, not that we just narrow down to one, but really building that next strong vision of the next 50 years of PSU. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just would go back to the first kind of thing we talked about is like, if we are to be this, one of our biggest distinctions is our embeddedness within this community and our ability to support it being a vibrant, livable, just place. Then we need to find a way to get on to create the space to continue to do that and continue to advance that practice. And so I think about a leader as kind of celebrating people, our faculty, our students, that work to go out and be embedded. That's not always super measurable, but that can come back and lead to relationships and lead to real change. I think being able to find a way to support that, and we need metrics and all that stuff, but to give the people the people of this university the space to do that, I think would be a gift. Yeah, I'll end there.
Yeah, great people here, and let them do their job. Is a little bit of what I heard, and maybe look a little bit beyond the urgency of the moment, which seems like a really important role for our leaders. Well, we have a small but happy audience here. I'm curious if all right, now you're happy. This thing's going to I'm curious if anyone has any questions. We've got a great panel here. Anyone want to ask a question of this panel? If not, I'll dig a little deeper into my arsenal.
Or you can just be silent.
Yeah.
I don't connect with the college, but for adult children, and they're concerned because when I started here at PSU, I was in the honors class, and the professor was asking students to go to the future, 1500 and beyond. It seemed okay with now, but they saw almost no future. They did not believe that the United States would be still here in the kind of government and democracy that we have. They were very concerned with climate change and how that would affect the world. They were just saw no future, and would like them to be leaders. And how do we show young people so that if you have no hope, you can't live. And so we have to build hope in them somehow. I don't know how, because their whole world has been nothing but falling apart. Since that we were born, that we just seem to be collapsing. So I don't know how the college, the university can do it, and I don't know how they can do it, but when all baby boomers die, they are going to use. You can't hope.
Good question. How do we instill hope in those folks that are going to be the next generation of leaders?
I think that's such a great question. And I might frame it a little bit differently, not so much as hope, but as optimism. I feel like optimism has I don't know, hope feels like we're just hoping kind of randomly, right? Whereas optimism is based on something. It's based on some understanding that things can get better, that things have gotten better. How you create that optimism, I'm not sure I have the answer to that, but I think a little piece of it lies in also at looking at our history, recognizing colonization, oppression, suffering, and then recognizing that things have changed, right? I think of small examples. I feel so lucky to do this job because I see examples, even while I'm seeing the ways in which we continue to fail people. I also see the ways in which change happens. So for example, I was out at, it's called Barbie's Village. It is a tiny home village that's going to go up on a piece of land in Northeast Portland. It's going to house Indigenous families, women and families. And the reason they're going to be able to do this is because a church in Laurelhurst donated land to something called the Future Generations Collaborative, which is an Indigenous focus group. This is land back. That's a radical concept, but it's happening. Land back is happening. So, to me, that's how I generate optimism for myself. And I think that a role that PSU can play is to really examine, rather than we focus a lot on what doesn't work, and we need to, but let's also focus on what has worked, what can work, what has worked in analyzing problems and solutions.
Yeah, what are those best practices that, yeah. Other thoughts?
Young people. For me, it has a lot to do with a lack of perspective. They're probably the most informed 20-year-olds that have ever lived on the planet. But information isn't perspective. Information is not knowledge and wisdom. And so I think what the university can do is take all of that information that these kids have and try to find a way to give them perspective about how the world really works. And some of that is what we've talked about today. Experience out in places, and you see challenges, there's no question. But you also see a lot of good things going on, a lot of great work, a lot of inspirational work that people are doing too. So I think the university can give people perspective, and I think that's a good way to kind of break down cynicism, which I think is all too much supply these days, for sure.
And I can see that the university is by including senior auditors really helps the professors in giving to those students. So I think that's smart.
Yeah. Learn, have everybody in one place together. Bring in all those generations. I love that. I will say I watched my son who's 21 and been through the pandemic, and it was a pretty disruptive thing, as you said, for lots of folks. And he keeps moving from place to place, thinking that the place is going to be the solution. I'm fascinated by that all the time, and I mean it worries my wife and I a lot, but it's also a very interesting experiment to watch.
Yeah.
And at some point, I'm like, let's land this. And what you hopefully come out of, he's going to OSU now, what he hopefully comes out of that experience with, I often think is a better understanding that maybe it's not the place, it's the behavior that you're going to engage in that place to make it the place you want it to be. And so when I hear you talk about that cynicism or loss of hope, or whatever it is, I just think, oh boy, I hope what happens is they come to love the place so much, as so many of us do, that they want to be the change that next. Other questions from folks out there? Yeah.
Rick Schrock, professor at urban city planning. I came in late, but going to core mission teaching classes. So I may have missed this in the first part of the presentation, but the conversation, but I think the discussion about collaboration and the relationship between PSU and both internally, but also with respect to public sector partners like the county and the city, it takes capacity, it takes resources to do that work. I think especially, in the university right now, the PSU of the current moment, the resources to do that sort of work, it's hard to quantify impact. how do you make it an argument, how do you make a case for the value that that brings, both to the university and to the community overall? You know, for the next president coming in, or the board of trustees, or for legislators, or local government officials who value the capacity that kids bring to that equation. How do you make that value proposition about why PSU needs to be invested in as in terms of that capacity to bring different local government units, community partners around the region together? Maybe you all solved that in the hour before I got.
Yeah, just watch the recording. Yeah.
We did not. That's a great question, Greg, and we did not solve it. And this is a complicated question. How do we, I mean, how does Portland State make the value proposition so that it can get investment from the community, from the state? I've got lots of thoughts on that, but I'm not a
I
panelist.
guess I have the beginning of a thought for the rest of the conversation, which is, to me, it goes a little bit to a question we didn't get to, but that the paper raised of how do you define an urban university? And I prefer urban serving university, just by the way. I feel like the serving adds something. So, you know, answering that question and being really clear about what does it mean to be an urban serving university? How is that different? Let's just be really concrete and say from other universities in Oregon's public university system. And to me, I think that's how you articulate the value proposition, by saying this is what we do, and we do it because we're here in this urban area. No one else is, and here are all of the benefits that not no one else is, but sorry, I realize I'm treading probably on thin ice somewhere over there, but you know, but the value it brings to our students is that it offers them this very experiential problem solving way of learning and engaging in their community and of building career pathways, you know, so on and so. But I do feel like it comes back to clarity about PSU's identity. You know, and I think that again, as I watch my young adults, I think in this world that interdisciplinary, concrete, experiential way of learning is a really attractive value proposition. So that's my 2 cents on how you do that.
Well, I think we've struggled with this question for quite a while. Looking at Sheila, Institute of Metropolitan Studies that I mentioned before was a constant battle of trying to get enough resource to do a lot of the things that we talked about today. And I don't know what the magic answer is. I think we do have to develop a much closer relationship with the broader community, and whether it's the government sector or the nonprofit sector, so that value proposition can become more visible and more evident. I don't think it's that visible and evident to most leaders, in at least public sector leaders in
Yeah, I don't
the
think so
region.
either.
And the Institute was one small way that we brought those people together. And they at least had dialogue about what could the role of the university be that could help solve these really difficult challenges. And I'm not saying that because we had that venue, it got us lots of resources, because it didn't, not in every case. And so, but I still think it's about awareness and understanding the value proposition and what is there for us. And then, you know, somebody's going to have to smack us a little bit and say, you know, you guys are getting something out of this, whether you know it or not. And let's talk about how we get the most out of it. And that may involve us owning up some resources, you know, to try and make a better relationship.
Did you write that down too?
I did write that down.
I think it's
I will
important
tell
too,
you,
right?
I'll tell you, but it's right. I mean, it is interesting, and I've looked at some of the programs that are out there, right? There's a wonderful program that's operated from the city with PCC that really finds a way to connect in at the high school level to identify how do we keep how do we keep the best and brightest students here? How do we identify those students that wouldn't otherwise think there was a pathway into community college or into university? How do we engage them in imagining a new future for themselves that ultimately becomes a new future for our community? And I do think we need to tell our story better about being a pathway to that opportunity. And because I often laugh, right? I challenge either of you to walk down any hall in your organization more than 10 feet and not run into a PSU grad. I don't think it's possible to do. Because I think,
I
you know,
can't
going,
get 2 feet.
that's right. But again, going back to the paper and noting, right, that we need planners, right? I mean, the siren call 50 years ago, there's going to be this massive urbanization in our community. We need you to represent Portland State. We need you to get those planners in there. We need you to get those teachers in there. We need you to get those social workers in there. We need you to get the fill in the blank, right? And what I love about being here is I do think we've risen to the occasion, and we have delivered a hell of a lot of planners, a hell of a lot of social workers, a hell of a lot of teachers into this community. And we are super quiet about it, right? We're like, and I think we all, to some extent, those of us that work here, we kind of pride ourselves on that. Like, look at how impactful we're being, and we don't have to emblazon it on everything we do, right? We just know, because that's who we are. And, you know, we're either going to have to understand that with that comes some scarcity, or we're going to have to figure out a way to leverage that and to actually building programs. I love the Future Connect program. I've looked at it a lot. I've talked to my team about it because it actually acknowledges, right? We're gonna put some wraparound services around some students. We're gonna get them into a great community college. We're gonna follow them with some ideas about how to create a career pathway. I doubt the county or the city is gonna just, you know, you have so many demands on your resources that, you know, you're pulling that dollar away from someone else is gonna be impactful. So it's our job, I think, in some ways, to talk about how we can be impactful if you give it to us, or be more impactful if you give it to us. And I welcome suggestions on how we can make that story more compelling, because we forget that maybe it doesn't just tell itself.
The narrative, I have to just jump in. I didn't know if we'd hit an angle at it, but we've kind of gone that workforce development
Yeah.
side of things right now, and then but linking it to the funding. And now I need our econ colleagues, because I don't have any background in taxes, but like the human capital investment component, right? And so thinking about, I pulled a quote that I actually wrote down. I know we're supposed to be citing our paper here, but from Thomas Friedman's book, Thank You for Being Late. He's got a piece in there where he says, if traditional post-secondary schools are going to remain relevant in a world where everyone will require lifelong learning, educators need to provide those opportunities at a viable speed, price point, and level of on-demand mobility. So I hear our call to action with the university. Then he goes on to say, and we'll need a new social contract between governments and citizens. We need to create every possible regulatory and tax incentive for every company to provide and every worker to get access to intelligent assistance, I don't know through the mask if you can hear, the intelligent networks and intelligent financing for lifelong learning. And I was just really intrigued. Like I said, I'm not a tax piece, but to that human capital investment, and whether that could be one of the funding opportunities, so that as folks are looking at those, you know, what can be funded by the employer, because I think over time we've seen that gets cut, right? Investment in being able to pay on behalf of employees. And so I toss that out there. We'll go find our econ colleagues and
Well, we've shifted the burden, right? I mean, if you wanna go through and get a college degree, and you want to do this and you want to do that, we just so shifted the burden onto the student over the last decade or 2 decades. I mean, all of us went to school a long time ago, and that wasn't the challenge we faced. Yeah, we have a very short period of time.
Well, I was in ROTC, so I was going to school when school got paid for, and I got a job right after.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got the Hatfield Fellows program where we place people in these jobs. we've got the Oregon Fellows Program where it's a longer period. What about doing something like Worcester Polytechnic does something where they have one semester you're working, one semester you're studying, what you work on? What about coming up with those kinds of programs and basing them on the Hatfield or Oregon Fellow structure to have a longer, more deep integration into the city? Or the full metropolitan.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
You do have a program some of the students participate in an engineering program at the city where they actually rotate between, I can't remember if it's a year or not. A year with environmental services, a year with the Water Bureau, and a year with transportation as engineering students. And they all get hired, all of them. We suck up everyone we can. And it's a really good program.
But I think, I mean, to the kind of mechanism you had talked about earlier in terms of if you do an internship, then you kind of have an easier pathway. I mean, I think we really, and we need to also think, because PSU is real good at creating lots of programs. Like we have, we are scrappy and distributed. And I do think something in order to like really pull a big lever where many more of our students can benefit, we need to think about how we can also do something that that can touch many students. Because like the MECOM program, yeah, is great. It's going to be for engineers, and there are engineers, some of them are getting jobs. There's a huge portion of our students that aren't. And so I think part of this is also understanding kind of the supply and the demand side. I'm fascinated by the 600 openings you have, and like and doing some of that mapping work. Same with yours, of being like, it's probably not perfect fit, but like we should be doing the work to see where that match looks or is, what are those barriers, and then what are those very systemic ways we remove those barriers, and having agreements that allow those things to be removed. And I think that's, if we get that right, we're gonna have a very strong case, because we're gonna have even more metrics of placing students in these organizations. I'll also say to Greg's point, like as we get resources, I think quite often the resources come around a project, right? And then you do the project and you move on. And we need to be really thoughtful about how we also get resources for the long-term partnership. And we always undervalue the partnership or assume that'll happen somehow, and then it doesn't happen. And then we lose continuity, and we lose the ability to build relationships and do some of this bigger stuff together. And so how do we find ways to resource that partnership? If we do that, I think we're able to get closer, or get closer to that future that we're all talking about.
Well, we're right up against the end of our time, and I think it's a nice way to finish it, because I think 50 years ago, what the folks that wrote the 1972 plan understood was co-investment between the university and the community was a path to a much better space, or at least a path. We'll see. And I think where we can leave it today is just, all of these opportunities for us to co-invest in our community are and can make such a difference for us in our day-to-day lives. And so I really appreciate the time and energy that all of you have taken to share with us a little bit about what we can do as an institution to be a partner. And I would just, I'd leave us by saying, if there are more ideas, we're ready, one, and two, hopefully, when you see them, when you see those opportunities, you embrace them for our students, for our community, because they really are going to be that future. So I'm going to stop there, but I'm happy to give anybody else the last word. So, well, again, I thank the audience that's here, the audience that's looking at this either right now as we're zooming it, or on YouTube, where we'll probably live in perpetuity, as everything does now. And that's okay, because there were a lot of great ideas, a lot of great conversations that happened today. So again, thanks to all of our participants. Really, really grateful for you sharing your time with Portland State University. And with that, good night.
Thank you.
So I think you are my commissioner then, because I was right by Dino's.